This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan's former president on trial for corruption as the formation of the country's new ruling body is delayed. Overseas Chinese stage rallies for peace and order in Hong Kong. And Kenya joins a campaign for a global ban on the ivory trade. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me in studio is Panina Karibe with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. Coming up on Africa Live Business. Ghana's central bank revokes the licenses of 23 insolvent financial institutions. And Africa Development Bank set to revise the continent's economic outlook. I'll be back in a bit with the details of the stories and plenty more for now. It's back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Panina. We start the hour in Hong Kong, where police are denying allegations that plainclothes officers have been infiltrating protests. The accusations came after more than 100,000 people demonstrated in Victoria Park and the streets of Hong Kong Island.
Some video shot by residents last night showed a group of people who were wearing dark-colored clothes entering the police headquarters. Residents suspected that the officers had disguised themselves as protesters. After investigation and verification, there were a few officers wearing dark-colored clothes last night who went back to the headquarters to start the night shift at around 10:40 p.m. That was handover time and the traffic around headquarters was quite busy. So they got out of their vehicles nearby and walked back to the building on foot. The allegations are false.
Well, police also say that nearly 180 officers have been injured over the past 2 months. They say they respect the public's right to express their demands, adding they only resort to the use of proportionate force when protesters act violently. The police say they hope protesters will express their views peacefully so as to not impact other people's lives. Meanwhile, Chinese people living abroad have been holding rallies in support of the Hong Kong government and police. In London, hundreds marched to Trafalgar Square, calling for peace and order in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, in Beijing, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said overseas Chinese have a right to demonstrate against violence in Hong Kong, but also said the demonstrators must obey local laws.
Firstly, it is entirely reasonable for Chinese citizens abroad, including students, to express their anger and opposition to words and actions that seek to split the country and defame China. Secondly, at the same time, we also hope that Chinese citizens abroad will express their patriotic enthusiasm in a rational way and also pay attention to their own safety. Thirdly, the Chinese government always urges its citizens living abroad to obey local laws and regulations. Meanwhile, we also hope the relevant countries will have respect and understanding for the legal activities of the Chinese citizens living there and guarantee their legal rights.
Sudan's former president, Omar al-Barshir, has appeared in court for the start of his corruption trial. Bashir is facing charges for receiving and possessing foreign funds. Investigators told the court more than $7 million was recovered at his residence. According to investigators, Bashir told them he received $25 million from Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This was in addition to 2 payments of $30 and $35 million each. The payments were allegedly used outside the state budget. Bashir's lawyer has denied the charges, calling them baseless. Sudan's public prosecutor also charged Bashir in May with involvement in the killing of protesters. He also faces additional charges from the International Criminal Court. Well, earlier we spoke to Dr. Ziad Akil, a political analyst and researcher at the Ahram Center for Security and Strategic Studies in Cairo. He spoke to us about the significance of the ongoing trial and the charges leveled against al-Bashir by the International Criminal Court.
I think that there will be a lot of political dimensions within this trial, not only legal ones. And we have to notice, first of all, that this is because of the weakness of the Sudanese state institutionally, and also because we have seen this in Africa over the past few years in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Algeria. There is a political tension sort of causes a defunct judicial system, and this is a proof of how weak institutionally African states are, specifically the Arab ones, and specifically the ones who are witnessing Egyptian tension. And of course, we have to put what is happening with al-Barshir in comparison with what happened with Hosni Mubarak, with what happened with Zain al-Abidin bin Ali, with what happened with Muammar al-Gaddafi, with what happened with Abdulaziz Bouteflika. So there is a generation of political leadership that is being changed, that is being transformed, that the people no longer want. And it is creating political tensions within the continent. And we have to make these comparisons between the different cases because they are very much similar within their content. I believe that the ICC will not be a very efficient tool of transparency within such a trial. I believe that al-Barshir, even if he is transformed to the ICC, there should be a role for the international community to try and pressure for this sort of trial. If this role is not practiced, the ICC will not be able to actually put al-Barshir on a just and transparent trial. So we are not only talking about the role of the International Criminal Court, but we are also talking about the role of the international community within the areas or the zones of conflict in Africa or elsewhere, specifically in Africa, because there has been more than one case where the ICC did not prove to be an efficient actor. Therefore, there must be support from the international community in order for this trial to be as transparent and as just as it could be.
Meanwhile, Sudan's Transitional Military Council has delayed the formation of a sovereignty council by 48 hours in order to give the opposition more time to sort out a consensus on their side for candidates to represent them on this key transitional body. Now, in the meantime, the country will name its new prime minister on Tuesday. Forces for Freedom and Change have nominated economist Dr. Abdallah Hamdouk. His nomination is the first step in the implementation of a power-sharing deal between the opposition and the ruling military council. He'll name his cabinet a week later. CGTN's Brian Toussaint reports.
Rare scenes of jubilation filled the streets of the capital after generals and opposition leaders signed the document that will govern Sudan's 3-year transition to civilian rule. Making the most of a new freedom acquired during 8 months of protests and clashes with men in uniform that left at least 250 people dead, Sudanese families could not hold back their joy.
The civilian-led government must eliminate all the inequalities rather than using it, and rather than the reinforcement of these inequalities.
If they do not these things in the right way, that means we will proceed against them. We will proceed against them another time.
The ruling Sovereign Council is to be comprised of 5 civilian members, 5 military nominees, and 1 jointly chosen 11th member. This body, which will replace the Transitional Military Council, will be headed by a general for the first 21 months and a civilian for the last 18 months. A cabinet is then to be formed before Sudan's new institutions can tackle the main challenges that lie ahead, including reviving the country's economy.
We hope it is the beginning of good things. Yes, we trust them, but not 100%, and we hope it's for the best.
We still have people who are missing. We are asking the new government to bring them back to us. The celebration we are having is not because now we have a civilian government. No, it's a celebration of the martyrs because their rights will be respected. It is now the right time to ask for the fate of those who are missing, and we are not yet celebrating.
Many see this as the beginning of a new Sudan after 30 years of rule by the now detained Islamist general Omar al-Barshir. Bashir is wanted by the International Criminal Court on genocide charges for crimes committed in the Darfur region and faces trial for corruption, but his fate remains unclear. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have confirmed a new case of Ebola far from the area where previous cases were reported. The Health Ministry said the new case was reported in the village of Penga in the eastern region of Walikale, which is almost entirely controlled by militia groups. The area is difficult to access because of thick forest and poor roads. A third case of the disease has also been confirmed in South Kivu region, 100 kilometers from the epicenter of the current outbreak, which has killed nearly 2,000 people. Now, the number of children in the Democratic Republic of Congo who've been orphaned or abandoned due to the Ebola epidemic has more than doubled. The United Nations Children's Fund now says there is an urgent need for more specialized care for children affected by Ebola. Leon Senyange reports.
According to the UN agency UNICEF, more than 1,300 children have been registered as orphans since the start of the Ebola outbreak last August. Within the same period, close to 2,500 children have been separated from their parents or caregivers. Officials say it is a harrowing experience for children who are watching their parents die in front of them or seeing loved ones taken to Ebola treatment centers, uncertain of when or if they will return. Health officials are working on scaling up the child protection programs in the Ebola-affected areas to help the children deal with the loss, stigma, and isolation. The current Ebola outbreak in the DRC is the second worst ever. It has so far killed more than 1,800 people. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Police in Uganda have confirmed the death of 10 people after a truck carrying petroleum burst into flames in the western district of Rubirizi. According to police, the driver of the truck lost control and rammed into 4 commuter taxis that were loading passengers at a busy trading center. The accident comes just a week after a fuel tanker explosion in neighboring Tanzania killed 85 people. CGTN's Michael Balege has that report.
Police say the death toll is likely to go up as more people are reported missing. Many nearby shops caught fire as petroleum spilled from the burning truck. Investigators say DNA testing may be required to identify the bodies of the 10 victims found so far. Police say the petroleum tanker was on its way from Kenya to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The last fuel tanker accident in Uganda happened in 2013. That fuel tanker burst into flames, killing more than 30 people who were siphoning fuel. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Kenya joins a campaign for a global ban on ivory trade. And Spain offers its ports to stranded migrants.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures.
we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Representatives of 183 member states are convening in Geneva for the UN Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. The international agreement between the 183 countries regulates trade either by imposing outright bans or requiring permits so that rare animals and plants are not overharvested. This year's meeting will focus on animals such as elephants, giraffes, rhino, sharks and pangolins, as well as minerals like rosewood. Our correspondent Julia Leobova reports from Geneva.
The fate of African elephants and their ivory is one of the biggest items on the agenda of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, known as CITES. 183 member states are meeting in Geneva until the 28th of August for a conference held every 3 years. During the negotiations, they will consider 56 proposals to expand a legally binding treaty which already covers some 36,000 species. While 3 of the proposals on elephants and ivory are contradictory, African elephants were first listed as a species of concern by CITES in 1997, and the global ban on ivory was imposed in 1989. However, now South African countries Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe and Zambia are seeking to open up trade in ivory again to selected countries and under certain conditions. However, other nations are seeking the highest possible protections for all of Africa's elephants. As well as elephants, there are likely to be significant debates on giraffes, sharks, rhinos and a number of threatened plant and tree species. Some environmentalists are very concerned about giraffes, who they say are suffering a silent extinction, with numbers dropping by 40% over the last 30 years. A global trade in shark fins is driving demand for mako sharks and is pushing them to extinction, according to CITES. Well, poaching and illegal trade in wildlife involving organized crime groups is a major issue for discussion during this conference. Species targeted by wildlife criminals, and on the agenda this conference include pangolins, an ant-eating mammal hunted for its huge protective scales, which are used in a traditional Chinese medicine, as well as rhinos, Asian big cats and cheetahs. Julia Lubova, CGTN, Geneva.
Meanwhile, Kenya has joined the regulator of global wildlife trade in a campaign to lobby for a global ban on ivory trade in order to save the remaining elephant population that is facing threats like poaching. Well, CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy sat down with Jim Nyamu to talk about an elephant research scientist and activist to talk about poaching and ivory trade.
The campaign, dubbed Elephants and Ivory Should Never Be Ripped Apart, seeks to raise global awareness on the need to protect endangered iconic large mammals like the elephant. Kenya is lobbying for world support in listing of the continent's elephants in Appendix 1 of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora amid serious threats to their survival.
Trade of ivory is ripping Kenya apart. Because the minute you trade in ivory, our national heritage is being destroyed. Our entire economy depends on tourism, and tourism is nature-based, which we depend on our elephants.
Activists are calling for stringent measures aimed at strengthening Kenya's position in delegitimizing ivory trade that threatens extinction of African elephants.
Kenya's position in terms of ivory, there is no intrinsic value on ivory. And that's why we talk of ivory belongs to elephants. Because the moment you detach an ivory from an animal, that's a dead animal. And we have no other positions with the ivory. We don't keep ivory that we are looking forward to have a one-off sale like other countries.
While elephants in Western, Central and Eastern Africa have long been listed among the species in need of most protection under CITES, some trade has been permitted in Southern Africa, where elephant populations are higher. The Geneva Conference is being closely watched by conservationists as key in saving endangered species from being wiped out. The conference is also crucial to Kenya, as it will seal the fate of the country's elephants and other endangered species. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, Zimbabwe has a $600 million war chest of ivory and rhino horn gathering dust in a vault. The southern African country is sitting on the huge stockpile while it waits while it fights for the right to sell it if the trade were legalized.
They devour and trample through acres of forest every year. Now, Zimbabwe's 84,000 plus elephants have exceeded the country's ecological carrying capacity and its means to take care of them.
We are doing man management. We do a lot of law enforcement. There's need for vehicles for patrols. There's need for radio for communication. There's need for water. Hwange doesn't have a perennial river, and most of those water sources, they're artificial. In fact, Hwange is run through 100% bore water, and the boreholes need drilling. They need maintenance. All those things, they need money, they need resources, and we don't have money. So where do you get the money? We then believe in what we call sustainable utilization of this resource.
And that means the dead elephants must pay for the upkeep of those that are still alive. Unlocking funds through ivory sales will also mitigate increasing human-wildlife conflict.
As long as we know that the benefits will accrue to those people who live with wildlife, and these are the same people who are enduring a lot of pain. So when we can harvest as much as we can and also be responsible enough to direct some of those benefits back into those communities and into conservation, would have achieved a purpose.
So far, Zimbabwe has raised money by exporting live beasts. It's defended the sales, which are helping to manage the numbers and are above board.
We are not saying our systems are perfect, but the process is watertight. The process is internationally approved through CITES, through air travel, and all those things.
Zimbabwe says it's more than 30,000 elephants beyond its carrying capacity, and they run the risk of destroying their own and other animal species' natural habitat. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
The South African National Parks Association, which is tasked with protecting and conserving the country's flora and fauna for future generations, hosted its first long table lunch for women. The event was in honor of Women's Month in South Africa. Renee Dolkamp has more.
Most of these women have lived in disadvantaged communities around the Bontebok National Park in South Africa's Western Cape Province for most of their lives. Yet many of them have never been near or visited any of the country's other national parks before. Today they are meeting with SANParks and its partners to discuss potential opportunities in conservation, tourism and farming.
Gatherings such as these are important in that they give us as SANParks an opportunity to engage with our local stakeholders, and also provides them with the opportunity to be able to communicate with us should they see opportunities that are relevant to them that they would like to partake in our national parks.
Opportunities for women in public works programs, such as clearing alien vegetation in certain national parks, cleaning the country's coastline, and other conservation projects.
I think the community, normally they're just so disconnected with the environment, and they living right here on the doorstep of this beautiful, park. So what we try to do from our organization, we partner with SANParks, with Bontebok National Park, and we do programs together so that we can actually inform and show people that they can get access, to the park and to be involved in, various aspects of the environment, etc.
Around 40% of SANParks staff are women, from entry level to top management. And events such as the Women's Long Table Dialogue are aimed at encouraging more and more women to experience and explore South African national parks.
Women are on the rise at the moment. They're very strong and they have a lot of great ideas that can aid in the world of conservation or tourism as well, and farming.
We've also got a people and conservation department which works very closely with our stakeholders, our communities. They bring them into the park to inform them about what's happening in the park, why conservation is such a critical component, and why national parks exist.
Renette Alcom, CGTN, Bontebok National Park, South Africa.
To news further afield now, Spain has given a rescue ship stranded off the Italian island of Lampedusa the green light to take migrants on board to a Spanish port. The offer comes amid an incident where migrants on board the ship attempted to swim ashore on Sunday following 2 weeks of waiting for a port at which to dock. The migrants, most of whom are African, were picked up by the Open Arms charity boat off the coast of Libya. CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy has more.
Video footage filmed from Open Arms showed migrants swimming towards the shoreline of Italy before they were returned to the ship. According to Open Arms director and founder Oscar Camps, there were constant fights on board and the tension was unsustainable.
We have been at sea for days. People have been jumping into the water and fighting. We hope the public prosecutor's office will intervene.
The Spanish government offered Algeciras as a port to disembark migrants from the ship after Italy's far-right interior minister Matteo Salvini refused them entry. The Open Arms rescue team says they were unable to dock in Spain, citing an emergency situation on board. The migrants, most of whom are African, were picked up by the Open Arms boat off the coast of Libya. They had been waiting to disembark on the southern Italian island of Lampedusa. Daniel Arapmoy, CGTN.
Meanwhile, security officials in the Sfax region of Tunisia raided a house this week where 51 sub-Saharan Africans were living. Investigations revealed they intended to illegally cross the country's maritime border into Italy. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi reports.
Human rights activists in the city of Ras Jdir in Tunisia said that the Ivorian nationals arrested by the security forces in Sidi Mansour in Sfax over attempted illegal crossing of the Tunisian maritime border to Italy were taken the next day to Medellin, then to the Tunisian-Libyan border, north of Ras Jdir.
The situation of the migrants is very difficult. They arrived from Libya, where insecurity reigns, and failed to reach Italian shores. Tunisian authorities released them near the Libya border.
The Tunisian Minister of Social Affairs declared that regional authorities have provided food and shelter to the 36 Ivorian nationals, including 11 women and 4 children.
Our services have taken care of the African migrants. Our role as a state is to provide medical and humanitarian assistance. The flow of migrants continues while we're trying to deal with this crisis.
The minister condemned the irregular migration attempt, which put the lives of many people at risk.
Every day, migrants drown at large. Tunisia will neither tolerate illegal migration or accept to become a platform of departure for illegal migrants who dream of reaching Europe while it's still a nightmare.
The prosecutor's office in Sfax said the investigation revealed that the organizer of the illegal trip was also from Côte d'Ivoire. He was immediately arrested and placed in pre-trial detention while court cases were drafted against the others for illegal entry in the country. According to the Interior Ministry, 2 irregular migration attempts of maritime borders were thwarted by the Coast Guards of Mehdiya this week. A 3rd attempt was also foiled in Sfax Governorate. 34 individuals, including 2 women, were arrested by the National Guard units. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Recapping your top stories this hour, Chinese people living abroad have been holding rallies in support of the Hong Kong government and police. In London, hundreds marched to Trafalgar Square, calling for peace and order in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, in Beijing, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said overseas Chinese have a right to demonstrate against violence in Hong Kong. Sudan's former President Omar al-Barshir has appeared in court for the start of his corruption trial. Bashir is facing charges for receiving and possessing foreign funds. Investigators told the court of more than $7 million that was recovered at his residence. According to investigators, Bashir told them he'd received $25 million from Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo have confirmed a new case of Ebola, far from where previous cases occurred. The Health Ministry said the new case was reported in the village of Pinga in the west-eastern region of Walikale, which is almost entirely controlled by militia groups. And police in Uganda have confirmed the death of 10 people after a truck carrying petroleum burst into flames in the western district of Ruburizi. According to police, the driver of the truck lost control and rammed into 4 commuter taxis that were loading passengers at a busy trading center. The accident comes just a week after a fuel tanker explosion in neighboring Tanzania killed 85 people. And those are your top stories at this hour. Up next, your business news with Penina Karibe.
Thank you, Lindy. Coming up on Africa Live Business. Ghana's central bank revokes the licenses of 23 insolvent financial institutions. And Africa Development Bank set to revise the continent's economic outlook.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Bank of Ghana has revoked the licenses of 23 savings and loans companies and finance house companies. The Apex Bank said the decision was necessary as the institutions were insolvent. The financial institutions had failed to raise capital to run their operations sustainable, even after a grace period given by the Bank of Ghana. The regulator resolved that the institutions have no reasonable prospects of recovery and that their continued existence poses severe risks to the stability of the financial system and the interests of their depositors. Now that a deal has been signed by the Military Council and the opposition for a roadmap for democracy in Sudan, CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at the challenges ahead for the leaders in Sudan to rebuild the shattered economy.
Economic growth at less than 2%, down from 3% in 2018. Inflation reaching highs of 60%, and the Sudanese pound found in the black market at a price of 70 per dollar. Numbers that don't make for a good reading. It's the effects of a decade-long economic embargo from the West, corruption and political conflicts. But Sudan, ravaged by poverty, has the resources to become an economic force in the African continent.
Sudan is not short of natural resources. It has vast areas of arable land for agriculture that can feed the whole continent. There's huge potential for investments in agriculture and livestock and the related agricultural industry. In addition to oil, despite the cessation from the south, there's potential for large oil reserves in north of Sudan.
The political deal signed this week establishes a transitional council of members of the military and the opposition forces, and the formation of a government. The leadership's main mission now is to embark on economic reforms.
The answer to all these problems is production. They have to pump a lot of money and investment into projects to raise production levels, employ people, and create income. Oil excavation is also a priority.
Khartoum's economy has already received support in the form of huge investments from China, as well as loans and grants from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. There were wild celebrations marking the end of the political conflicts. However, there's a lot of work lying ahead to rebuild an economy shattered by political instability and to improve the lives of the Sudanese people. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The African Development Bank plans to revise downwards its economic outlook for the continent. The bank's president, Akinwumi Adesina, says the ongoing China-US trade dispute and uncertainty over Brexit poses risks to Africa's economic prospects. The trade war has disrupted global markets, and Britain appears to be on course to leave the European Union on October 31st without a transition deal. The bank will review the economic projection for Africa, estimated at 4% this year, if global external shocks accelerate. Adesina has, however, echoed the need to boost intra-African trade and agriculture to cushion the impact of external economic shocks. The recent ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area is expected to bolster economic growth and development. However, African countries need to remove non-tariff barriers to boost trade.
Import demand of China has fallen significantly. The industrial capacity has fallen significantly. And so the demand, even for products and raw materials for Africa, will only fall even further. So the effect of that will have a ripple effect on African economies as the demand for their products weaken from China. It will have another effect with regard to China's own outward bound investments, even on the continent. Okay? And so both in terms of official development assistance, but also in terms of investment in Africa will also be obviously affected, by that. The challenge cannot be solved unless all the barriers come down. Free mobility of labor, free mobility of capital, and free mobility of people. This is very, very important for the continental free trade area.
Commercial banks in Kenya have offered to retain interest rates on existing loans as a compromise to a rate repeal. The lenders are hoping to convince Parliament to scrap the interest rate capping law. Kenya Bankers Association has presented the proposal in a memorandum to Parliament as part of the submissions for the finance bill through which the National Treasury seeks to discard the rate cap. Following its introduction in September 2016, lending rates were capped at 13%, 4 percentage points above the central bank rate. This resulted to the end of expensive loans, with banks charging as high as 21% for non-secured loans. The CBK is pushing for the repeal after Kenya secured the renewal of the $1.5 billion standby credit facility with the International Monetary Fund in 2018. MPs are, however, opposed to the repeal on the law. Leaders from the Southern African Development Community have called on the European Union and other Western donors to end economic sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. Tanzania's President John Magufuli, who now chairs the economic bloc, said Zimbabwe has turned its economic prospects as it works to boost revenues and needs the support to revive its economy. Backed by other leaders from the region, Magufuli said the sanctions were counterproductive. The sanctions imposed in 2002 include arms embargo, freezing of assets and travel bans. Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa attributes the economic isolation and crippled economic development on the sanctions. Zimbabwe is facing high inflation and commodity shortages such as fuel, power and water. China's foreign trade has continued its robust growth with a 3.3% surge amidst the trade war with the United States. The results are considered a boost despite the previous forecasts by analysts who credit the performance to several factors, including the China Belt and Road Initiative. Here's more on that story.
China's Belt and Road Initiative has secured infrastructure development and investments across an estimated 152 countries. The plan has also supplemented trade, boosting China's economy immensely. However, the ongoing trade war with the United States has influenced a change in the dynamics. Various Chinese goods have been subjected to tariffs, which have led to markups of products.
The first reason would be that American companies have placed larger orders to make provisions and thus to make up for any price increases that could be experienced by products coming from China as a result of the trade war. The other reason would be that Chinese companies would have had time to find other markets, including the countries of the European Union, Africa, and Latin America. And these countries would have bought more than they did before. So these are basically the reasons that can explain the growth of China's trade balance despite the various U.S. sanctions.
The Belt and Road Initiative has offered regional connectivity as China pushes to establish a trading-centered network in global affairs. The country's economic growth has been accelerated by the potential rise in foreign trade. According to customs data, exports increased 6.7% in 2019, widening the trade surplus by 47.4%.
The most important thing in economic life is competitiveness, and Chinese economy competitiveness is now beyond doubt. China has several instruments that it can use. There is the efficiency of its economy and the currency, especially that the yuan has seen a slight decline. There are also major projects such as Belt and Road, which in terms of investments will allow China to make trillion-dollar investments over several years. China also has more than $3 trillion in reserves, so if it wanted to attack the U.S. currency, it would have already done so. I do not think we should be alarmed by the measures taken by the Trump administration because these measures affect Americans first. They will increase the prices of products imported from China, and it is the American consumer that has to pay.
In recent years, China has become one of the largest global trading partners. Its revenues are forecasted to grow with a potential increase in trade facilitation and in a bid to construct a unified large market. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The Office of the United States Trade Representative announced that it would delay the 10% tariff on some $300 billion of imports from China. Lindy Mtongana is an international trade manager of Asia at Western Cape Investment and Trade Promotion Agency, South Africa. Mtongana says that the U.S. government's pursuit of unilateral trade protectionism would seriously damage the interests of developing countries and harm the global economy. He argues that the correct way to achieve common economic development is through collaboration.
We've seen a protectionist global climate does one thing. It hurts the developing world. It hurts countries that are on upward trajectories, which are still quite delicate. And often when countries close their markets off using tariffs, they make it difficult for countries A, developing countries A, to source the things that they need to allow that developmental process to take place. And B, what it ultimately does is it thwarts that progress. And so China's insistence and posture on an open economy, global economy, is one that is aligned to a lot of developing countries' economic strategies and ambitions. And so for us, that's the win-win.
That's it for now. But ahead on global business, Ghana's central bank revokes the licenses of 23 insolvent financial institutions. We will be live in Ghana to assess the impact of the bank's decision. That's at the top of the hour. I'll see you then. For now, it's back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Panina. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, a South African designer creates jewelry inspired by her traditional African roots.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A young designer from South Africa is using a fresh, innovative and modern approach to manufacturing jewelry. The Lashongwe Jewelry Design and Manufacturing Company incorporates inspiration gathered from both traditional African roots and contemporary influences in each piece. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela tells us more.
Lashongwe celebrates and preserves the meaning behind her jewelry. Each piece celebrates the transition of life. From past to present, old to new, and dated to trend-setting. Njabu Griffiths is the founding member of Lashongwe Jewelry Designers. The company was founded in 2003 after Njabu got retrenched. She describes it as an outfit that has an innovative, dynamic approach to designing and creating accessories. With their roots firmly here in Africa, their designs incorporate traditional techniques with the latest trends in fashion and accessories.
I've chosen to make contemporary African jewelry. I think I've started where I know. I'm comfortable with the culture. I know a little bit more about our culture, so it was easy for me to start from a place of comfort, if I could put it that way.
One of Lashongwe's contemporary African jewelry pieces is this, inspired by the Zulu plug earring, which they customized to give something authentically African, but with a bit of a fashion flair.
What we've done, if we take, for instance, the Zulu earplug earring, we've taken it in its, in its modern form, and we've learned a little bit more about the Zulu culture, why they actually have the earrings in the first place, and we've sort of made them evolve to the modern, more of a fashion flair. So yeah, we've sort of evolved, and it's more modern and contemporary.
Her main clientele is those who appreciate the origins of her designs.
Our clientele is mostly tourists and people that are looking for something that's authentically African and modern, or with a bit of fashion flair. So it's basically people that appreciate other cultures and things like that.
The company is 100% female-owned and employs a number of other women and young people. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And coming up in your sports news. The 2019 Africa Games start in Morocco on Monday with the Egypt boxing team and Kenyan athletes eyeing glory.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal,